Hi there, welcome to Humans of Authenticity, and thank you for choosing my podcast. My name is Lily, and I'll be your host. Designed as a blank canvas to weave together a rich tapestry of human experiences and identity, Humans of Authenticity will share many heartfelt conversations with my guests on their stories and how they embrace their authenticity in all forms. Join me in these conversations, peel back all the layers and see how authenticity shines through. In each episode, my guests will choose a keyword from a selection of 12, which will be used as the theme of the conversation. Enjoy the episode today. Thank you, Janice, for joining me on this podcast channel. Let's start with your story. Can you share 3 things about you that you want others and our listeners to know?
Well, first, thank you so much for having me, V. It's a great pleasure to join you on your podcast. So 3 things that people should maybe know about me. That's a tough one, actually. The first thing is that one of the things that has helped to inform who I am and the work that I've decided to do is because of my own experiences in leadership spaces. Or I'll back up a little bit, not in leadership spaces, but on the receiving end of the way that leaders go about their own processes, the way that they engage with other people, and really wanting to learn more about that and understand it better. That has really helped me to get to a place where, you know what, I want to think about this a little bit more. I want to understand it, how we perceive leaders and leadership more broadly as a society. Those early experiences help to shape where I'm at right now. We can all probably think about times, even from the times we were children, where you had someone who was in a leadership position or someone who established themselves as a leader and how that impacted you. So that's one thing. The other thing is that my family is significant and very important to me. Going back to me being a kid, I was always really close with my dad. Both my parents worked a lot. That's something that helped to frame and form my approach to work and working and what's important, and making sure that you think about how your actions influence your family and how your actions can help to guide or even change the overall trajectory of your family and your family tree. So that has helped put me in a place where when I'm thinking about what I'm doing, I think about my family, my husband, my daughter, my extended family. I think about all those people. The last thing that I think that folks might want to know about me is I'm a little bit of a goofy human being, which is okay. I always kind of joke.
Unpack that for me. I love this. Unpack that for me.
I generally tell people I will find a way to trip and fall over just about anything. It doesn't matter what it is. When I think of myself as just a goofy person, like taking yourself too seriously is just not, I feel like, a whole lot of fun. I do enjoy fun. I think there's times where you need to be serious, but sometimes it's just okay to laugh at yourself and just laugh at what's happening. I think I've gotten to a place where I can embrace that and say, I'm going to laugh at myself. I'm a klutzy person. I'm going to drop something. I found my way to trip going upstairs or going down them or just walking. I will find a way to knock something down and just be laughing at yourself. Like, life is way too short to be so serious 100% of the time.
I'm just going to share very honestly. I find myself the same in terms of tripping and falling for no reason. I can walk on a flat land and I'll literally trip. My husband keep complaining of how oblivious myself about my environment. So I'm glad that I'm not the only one.
You're not alone. You're not.
I'm glad that I'm not alone in this. Love this. Let's unpack the first elements that you share about the leadership experience, those at the receiving end as the higher levels of perspective. Linking it back to the authenticity theme of our podcast series. As leaders and as members of society, we all know that we should embrace our authentic self so that we can maximize our potential, be a better contributors to the societies. At the same time, we also know that's not always the case. There will certainly be difficulties, obstacles, something that we always struggle with. as we go on our authentic path, what factors do you think prevent us from showing our true form?
That is a tough one, V, but a very relevant question. I'll say the first thing I think that impacts our ability to be our authentic selves and show up authentically in a space is whether or not we feel safe in a space. And especially in our working environment, what does that actually look like when we say a safe space? That can mean different things to different people. So in the absence of that safety, I think what we end up getting is a person who shows up in pieces of themselves, not their full self, maybe not their whole self. And not to say that you need to just kind of not have any boundaries or anything like that. But when there's a lack of safety, that really decreases an individual's opportunity, I feel like, to show up in a way that allows them to take risks, that allows them to sometimes speak their mind, to ask questions, or to speak up. And I think all of that is rooted in a person's ability to be their authentic self. Some other things that I think are related to that are just some societal pressure, frankly. If we think about where we're at right now, it can be a very tough for people to know how they are going to be received. So I think that's where we get into a lot of management of the self, right? I have to show up in a way where I feel like people are going to be okay with me or okay with what I say and getting that approval. So I think maybe that's where that's rooted in, seeking approval from others for how we are or what we say or how we choose to live and just be. Those are two of the biggest things that stand out to me when I'm thinking about authenticity and what our potential barriers there.
The part about seeking approval from others stand out for me, and I want to unpack that with you. A bit of a reflections first as human being. We're already very hard on ourselves, and now we have to also seek approval from others. So can you say all of the two layers pressing on each other and give us that unnecessary pressure to thrive and again to be our true self? How do you navigate those obstacles and difficulties then?
I think that for me is a work in progress. Let's say, for example, how I might show up in this space as a woman of color, as a woman in her, I would love to say mid 40s. I'm trending more towards the later 40s, like I'm inching there.
We'll stay with early 40.
I'll take it. But thinking about how all of those things pile up and how they intersect, right? So how do I manage that on the day to day and allowing myself to be all of those things at the same time and do so unapologetically? If I am being honest, some days are better than others. I feel like there are days where I engage in a heavy amount of management of how I'm showing up to make sure that the people around me are okay with how I'm showing up in the space. Then there are other times where I'm like, this is what you're getting, because it makes sense for me to be able to show up as I am, because that's where you're going to get the best of me. Anytime where I'm spending energy and time trying to manage these parts of me that might feel untidy to somebody else, I'm taking that energy and time and effort away from why I'm actually here and why I'm actually in the space. And sometimes being in that space, that you're there. And I think we talked about this a lot during ASAE and during our time as DELP scholars, is sometimes we're there and us being there is a disruption. And that's okay. And that is fine. So for me, the how is just reminding myself of some of those things. I might be the first person in this space, and that is okay. But if I'm the first person in this space, it's not okay for me to not fully show up. This is not the time for self-management. This is the time to show up.
So if you are the only person in the space, like the first in the space, do you feel intimidated, or do you feel that you're scared, or do you feel being judged again because you are the first in that space?
Well, I think all of those things are true, right? So you can show up in this space, feel intimidated, feel scared, but also still walk in your purpose for why you're there. for me, it's like, I don't want to show up anywhere and be like, oh, I'm not afraid. Well, yeah, sometimes there's that fear, sometimes there's that intimidation, but those can be driving forces for you to kind of level up and take yourself to the next level, rather than letting those things be obstacles that keep you away from performing or doing what you need to do or introducing something new. Those things can be fuel. So I think all those things can exist at the same time, showing up as the only one in the space or the first one in the space. So I can say, you know what? Not only am I here, I'm bringing all that with me because the goal is to make sure that I make such a footprint in here that I'm not the last person that looks like me and is like me in this.
I love how you turn all of that difficulties into your fuel and the drive so that you can hold the space for yourself in that. That's a good intro to our keyword conversation. I gave you a list of 12 keywords. Which one did you select?
I think did identity. I'm trying to remember. I think that's what I did, right?
Can you share with me why you chose identity when you think about being authentic?
That is something that I have over time, from I'll say probably my childhood to the present, that I have had to do a lot of work on in embracing my identity and who I am and how I am, what that means.
Can you describe for me your journey of how you embrace your identity?
Sure. I think early on, I really struggled with identity in two areas. One, physically, I'm short. I'm a short person. I was always trying to figure out what to do with my hair. And within our community as African American, skin tone is sometimes a huge deal. Early on, I struggled with those things as part of who I am. The other parts of that is less on the physical attribute side, but more internally. I would say I'm a person who would wear their heart on their sleeve, a very feeling and emotive individual. I cried a lot as a kid. I just cried a lot. I mean, it didn't have to be something bad happening. I was always crying. Like it was, So I struggled to find where I fit with those things. And I spent a lot of time trying to erase some of those things so they would not be seen as part of my identity and not part of who I am. So like you could be a person with a good heart, but you can't ever show anybody that. Like no one needs to see that because they'll think you're weak, or they try to take advantage of you, or how straight can I make sure my hair is so that it's more acceptable? Or there's not much I can do about my skin tone. I would just kind of be like, okay, well, hopefully people will like me, even though I'm not like lighter skinned person. And that's where I actually started wearing high heel shoes when I got to a certain age because I was short and I didn't want to be short. But I liked the way that they made me feel. So those things, like let's say wearing shoes, which I know you all have probably seen in our meetings together, I've adopted that as part of my identity. That's where I can actually now have fun with something that used to be a challenge for me. I can wear really fun shoes and really cute shoes and kind of rock it that way. Now, over the last probably almost 20 years of time, I stopped relaxing my hair. I'm like, you're going to get what you're going to get because this is how I naturally show up. This is part of my identity. It's part of who I am. It's how I was created, and that's okay. And the last part of that, which is just how I show up as a caring person and a person who leads with her heart, that one has been probably the biggest struggle because we're looking at how things work in corporate structure and other things. Sometimes that is not considered an asset for a leader, is to be one who is like emotive and things of that nature. But over the course of my journey, I feel like I've found ways to incorporate that in the way that I deal with my teams, in the way that I try to set an environment for them to be very open and to feel safe and to be able to have conversation with me. A good example of this is recently we had a meeting and I could tell the feeling and the energy wasn't there with my team. My team normally is very high energy, they're very talkative and things of that nature, and that was not happening. So I actually stopped the meeting and I'm like, okay, I'm feeling a shift in energy. I just really want to give folks an opportunity. Like, is everyone okay? And creating that space, what we found, some folks were struggling with certain things. Folks have been dealing with loss and not feeling well and so on. I'm like, you know what? So I think what we're going to do is just say, everybody take a minute. We're going to end our meeting early. go outside, get some sun on your face, take a minute, take a walk. Maybe we can share some photos of the things that we see when we go outside. So for me, that is more leading with the heart. Did we have business to attend to? Absolutely. But in that moment, that was not the time for business. That was a time for humanity and putting the human being first. So I feel like that is how things have evolved for me over time, from wanting to get rid of some things to fully embracing them.
This is such a great example that I'd love to unpack a bit more. Let's talk about your perceptions on your physical looks first. So I'm hearing a lot of struggling in the earlier days, and at some point you start accepting it and embracing the physicality of yourself. Can you share with me if there were any catalysts that helped you to realize that, or what triggered the perceptions and make you feel a lot more accepted and comfortable with who you are?
I can absolutely nail down the one catalyst for that. And that was my daughter. As a baby, I'm like, she is going to grow up to be a young Black woman. And I do not want her to have this. Like, I don't want her to have these hangups. I don't want her to have these things. And a lot of her cues are going to come from me. So if I'm not okay with me, how can I pass on to her that she should be okay with herself? So it was probably, I'm trying to think back. I have pictures with her when I started transitioning my hair and stopped straightening it. It was kind of in a weird stage. I want to say she might have been like 5 or 6. I stopped relaxing my hair. I never relaxed hers. I was like, I want you to fall in love with how you were made. Then you can figure out if you want to change it. That will be up to you. I am not putting that on you. So that was the catalyst for me to really start, like, you know what? Someone's watching your every move. You have to work this out.
It's so beautiful. Make sure your daughter listen to this episode. And I hope she appreciate that. Yeah, I love that. So go to the second elements of your example earlier about the internal. You said that you were very emotional, and I can tell you there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I'm watching a reality show and all for nothing, I'm just broke down crying. And my husband was like, what the? So I'm on that part with you. And I love how you turn that into a fuel and drive you and demonstrate that in your leadership. A similar question, what were the catalysts or what triggered you to then realize that emotions really a lot stronger than the perceptions that crying is only for the weak?
That one took longer. And I think that catalyst was actually, gosh, I want to say 2010, 2011. I was laid off from the organization I was working with. And what that gave me was an opportunity to really think about, what I had brought to the table, what I had poured into that work, which again, I think it was great work that we were doing. And just understanding how things flow was not like oh my gosh, I can't believe they laid me off. It was more, well, this is kind of how things work. Sometimes it happens and you kind of have to figure out how to go with the flow. But for me, it was more of, I spent a lot of time trying to fit into what my perception of what they wanted out of a middle or upper middle management person. Like, you got to be hard hitting. There's no space for you to be anything other than driving for results. And the way that you drive for results is to do these things. So after that, I was like, I did my best to still engage with people, but in a way that felt good to me. But I don't ever think I showed up as my whole self in that environment. And then having an abrupt disconnect to that environment was kind of a jolt to me. It's kind of like, how much time did you spend amending yourself in this space? And then they were like, thanks so much, but you got to go. So it's like, I poured a lot of energy into doing that. It was a wake-up call for me. Like, wherever you're at, embrace who you are, because organizations shift and change, but you shouldn't, in the things that really matter. Yeah.
So what I'm hearing from that example is the foundation block must be the values, the identity, and then we need to spend time to unpack, be aware, explore, and really understand that foundation, values, and identity of us. Can you share with me your approach in wiping out all of the noise around so that you can truly identify your identity at the time?
Well, at that time, I would say some of that was really having some conversations with my husband because he's very good at showing up as he is. Like, I think he's been a good example for me. And I think has really helped to encourage me to just be like, there's no reason for you to not be who you are. It doesn't make any sense. But really having those conversations during that time frame where I'm like, man, I spent a lot of time trying to change myself and it's just not. And for what? I don't even work there anymore. So that was part of it. And then I think we fast forward to, I would say, from an academic perspective and finishing my degree, I think it's in significant moments in time, I've had to rediscover myself, right? If you're pursuing a degree, pursuing the doctorate, like that is your whole world for however long that time is. It becomes your whole world. So after that, that was another inflection point where I'm like, I have to figure out who I am again because I had blinders on. Like, what do I even like to do now? Like, I don't even remember what I used to enjoy doing. So I think there are inflection points probably for every person where they have to revisit and rediscover who they actually are at their core. And I think for me, some of the times where it's easy to forget that is when you're on the verge of burnout, when you haven't given yourself time to really rest and really allow your mind time to rest and really engage in things that are important to you. That's where you can open yourself up for that.
What I love about that is you remind me that learning, reflection, and self-discovery is a continuous thought. It doesn't end one day and then we find the end of it. And the other thing that you remind me of from this, it is important to set a goal, but it's also important to take a step back after we achieve the goal, reconfigure ourselves. By your word, it's about rediscover and revisit who we are at the core. I can see the sense of identity will come through in all of that conversations. Now let's change our hat. Let's put on a leadership hat. And I can see that you've done a lot in this space to make sure that you provide a safe and build a trust for the team to be truly authentic in themselves when they show up. Can you share with us how did you manage to build that environment?
Building certain environments doesn't happen by accident. You have to go into it with the thought that in order for this team to function as a healthy unit, in order for us to get to the place where we are going to meet our deliverables or we are going to excel and meet our goals, we have to start with a healthy environment where people feel that it's okay to take risks. It's okay for them to show up as who they are. It's okay to ask questions. It's okay to have a bad day and to establish that trust, to know that in their moments of vulnerability, those moments will not be used against them at a later time. For me, it is really starting with the building of trust. When my team members come on, whether it's having conversations with them, learning about who they are as people, making sure also that they have a solid understanding about how everything that they do connects back to principle and mission and value and all of that. That helps to make sure that people feel that they can ask questions in an environment and be safe to do so. Let's say if there's something that we're looking at doing, a person can ask a question and say, but how does this tie back to our objectives? How does this tie back to our principles? Can someone explain that to me? If you don't feel safe, you're not going to ask that question. If your leader, supervisor, or anyone else is saying, this is something that we're going to do, we're excited about maybe going in this direction, if you don't feel safe, you can't ask, can you talk to me a bit about how this ties back to our principles? I'm understanding it, it sounds great, but how does it actually relate to what we're doing? The goal for me is, again, establishing that trust always, learning about who my team members are as people, understanding what they want, what their goals are individually, professionally, and personally. That's something that I actually have every one of my team members who reports to me, in addition to their professional development goals or stretch goals, they have to give me a personal goal. And some of them that's like, I want to finish sewing this quilt. For other folks, it might be, I want to finish 50 books this year. Whatever that is, I'm like, something that is meaningful in person to you outside of the scope of this work, because you're a whole human being. So those are things that I try to intentionally do when I'm working to make that environment happen.
I find that building trust in particular, there is the entire art around doing that. Can you give me an example or something you've done in the past so that you can build trust with the team?
First things first, I try to make sure that I do what I say that I'm going to do, like right out of the gate. I think that is one of the most essential pieces of trust building. Is I can't say I'm going to show up for you here and then I'm not there, or I want to give you the opportunity to work on XYZ project and then you work on it and then I take all the credit for it, right? So there's certain things that you have to start with. And I think trust starts with relationship building. Sometimes that's hard because that takes time. And I think an important piece of trust building is understanding that requires investment. It requires time. It requires energy, effort. I think all those things to me roll into those first steps of building trust. I have to be curious about who you are as a human being and what your needs are and what you want. I have to show up and be present, and I have to do what I'm going to say I'm going to do.
Thank you for that. I love how you bring out very specific and practical points here. I'm conscious of time, so I have two questions left. We're doing really well. Thinking about next 12 months, what's next for you?
Whew. So as far as my working life, there is a lot I think that's coming up in the next 12 months in the way of making sure that some of the goals that I have for our institute are taking shape and implemented. Working on things like micro-credentialing and certifications under our Leadership Development Institute banner, which I'm very excited about, working on the beginnings of that. Other things that are, I would say, coming up in the next 24 months is in 2024, I am supposed to be sitting for the CAE. So I'm like, I'm terrified. I'm working on, with the help of amazing people, you included, in terms of resources, tips, that the study schedule, thank you again, provided. So just really thinking about how to prepare myself for that. But that is coming up in my 2024. That's going to take a big chunk of my time, just in getting the preparation for that. So that's the other part of my 2024 in terms of what's coming up for me, is adjusting the way that I go about achieving my goals. Instead of having 10 goals, 4 goals maybe, and then building in the time to intentionally go after each one of them so that I'm not burnt by the time I get to the end of the year.
Giving yourself space to work on one at a time. I love that. Seeing what you are going to do in the next 12 months, which again sounds like you need 48 hours in a day to get there. But I'm sure you'll be able to thrive through. How do you ensure that your identity is held true in that journey, at the same time embracing your authenticity when working towards those goals?
I think the first part of that is just making sure that I have reminders set up for myself. Just that, how are you showing up today? Or how did you show up today? Let me ask myself those questions. Did we bring our full self to the table today? How might we have been hesitant? What are you holding back? Asking myself those questions, but also mentoring and coaching, making sure that I am continually working on that part of myself with a mentor and with a coach. Because I think that type of feedback is also essential to make sure that you can continue to show up how you want to show up. And the other parts of that too is, I think for me, one of the things I implemented last year, which we're still working the kinks out, because I think it's something that's new to folks, is to ask for feedback directly from my direct reports about certain things. And that's part of it. That's one of those things. It's like, what was your perception about how I showed up? Did you see a difference in how I showed up when I'm just talking to you all regularly? Or do you feel like something else was happening in this or that meeting? Really getting that feedback from other folks in the space who are interacting with me in the space, I think, to really help me get that full view.
It's fascinating about that feedback loop. Thank you for sharing that. We are getting to the end of the conversation. So, my very last question. If you are going on a dream vacation, what is the one item that you will take with you and why?
Ooh, one item I would take on a dream vacation. Maybe a journal. I was gonna say camera, but I think I'm gonna say journal. And the reason I'm not saying camera is because I think sometimes I can get distracted taking pictures and miss experiences. So I think I'm gonna say journal. So at the very least, I can get my thoughts down about what I'm seeing and what I'm experiencing without being too intrusive in the moments. Because I want to be present. If this is my dream vacation, I want to soak it all in. Yeah.
I love that. That's it for today's episode. Drop your thoughts in the comment section. I'd love to hear your take on the chosen keyword. Have a lovely time, and thank you again for spending time with Humans of Authenticity. Until next time.
My sister, we jokingly call her a private detective. She was able to put our family tree together going back to post-Civil War. And so when you think about culture and you can look that far back, it gives a sense of pride. You don't know the people who are on that tree necessarily, but they played a huge part, and they're a huge reason why you're here today. So that's the culture in terms of self. There are beautiful cultures all around us. You think about associations, you think about the DELP program. There are beautiful cultures all around us. Don't just learn about your own culture. Take the time and the opportunity to learn about other cultures. We talked about intersectionality. How do we connect together? How do we relate? By learning and understanding other cultures. That makes you a better ally, a better colleague, and that gives you a better understanding of the people that you work with, their cultures. And it's a sign of respect.